The eviction notice had my name on it, but the signature at the bottom was my father's. No court stamp, no lawyer, just a printed line. You have 7 days to leave this house. I thought it was a joke, until my bedroom key stopped working that night. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted me gone quietly. So instead of packing my bags, I started recording. And by the end of the week, the whole family knew exactly why. I found the notice folded neatly on my pillow. At first, I thought my mom had left a reminder. She loved leaving little lists about dishes or trash day, but the paper was heavier, printed, formal in a way that didn't belong in a bedroom. I picked it up and read the first line twice before the words made sense. You have 7 days to vacate the property. For a moment, I just stood there, still holding my bag, my shoes half off, staring at my own bed like it suddenly belonged to someone else. Homes aren't just walls and rent, they're routines, smells, the way the floor creaks in one familiar spot at night. And all of that, according to a single sheet of paper, was apparently temporary. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion, almost embarrassment, like I'd misunderstood a joke everyone else already got. I walked downstairs slowly, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. My parents were in the kitchen, talking quietly about groceries. Everything looked normal. The kettle hissed, the clock ticked, the TV murmured in the background. I held the paper up. What is this? My mother didn't look surprised. She just exhaled, like she'd been waiting for the question. My father didn't meet my eyes. And that was the moment something inside my chest tightened. Because people react differently to accidents, they rush to explain. But they react very calmly to decisions. It's just time, my dad said, voice flat. You need to figure things out on your own now. The words landed heavier than the paper. I wasn't behind on anything. I paid my share. I worked late. I stayed quiet. I'd spent years trying not to be a burden, trying to deserve the space I slept in. Suddenly, I was being told the space itself was conditional. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. 7 days? My mom folded a towel carefully before answering. We thought that was fair. Fair. The word echoed louder than shouting. I looked around the kitchen, the same table where we'd eaten birthdays, the same fridge covered in magnets from trips I wasn't invited to. I expected someone to soften, to say they didn't mean it like that. Instead, my dad finally looked at me and added, "It's better this way, less drama." That was when the empathy I'd been clinging to, the idea they were worried about me, trying to help me grow, started cracking. Because help doesn't come printed like a warning. Help doesn't give you a deadline where your home used to be. I asked where I was supposed to go. My mom shrugged slightly. Not cruel, just distant. You'll figure it out. I realized they'd already decided the conversation was over before it began. The paper wasn't a discussion. It was a conclusion. Anger began creeping in then, slow and hot. Not explosive, but steady. Not because they wanted independence for me, but because they wanted comfort for themselves. I saw it in how organized the kitchen looked, how my shoes had been moved from the door earlier, how my spare key was missing from the hook. This wasn't sudden. This was planned. I walked back upstairs, each step heavier than the last, and sat on the bed beside the notice. My room looked smaller now, like a hotel you already checked out of. I opened my closet and saw empty hangers they'd cleared space around, subtle signs I hadn't noticed before. That hurt more than yelling ever could, realizing people prepare for your absence while still smiling at dinner. Sadness settled in quietly. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a hollow understanding that I'd been living somewhere that stopped being mine before I knew it. I picked up the paper again and finally noticed the bottom line. Not a lawyer. Not a court. Just my father's printed name under the word owner. It wasn't legal. It wasn't official. It was personal. And suddenly the situation shifted from frightening to strange. Because if they truly had the right to remove me, they wouldn't need to pretend. They wouldn't need a fake notice placed on a pillow while I was at work. I stared at it longer, the shock blooming slowly. They weren't removing me the proper way. They were hoping I'd leave quietly without questioning it. And in that moment, the fear disappeared. What replaced it was clarity. This wasn't an eviction. This was a test to see if I'd accept being erased from my own home without a fight. I didn't pack that night. I sat on the floor with the notice in my hands and replayed the conversation over and over. 7 days. Said calmly, like weather. Like it wasn't my entire life compressed into a deadline. The more I thought about it, the more details surfaced. My spare key missing. My mail stacked separately on the table. Even my laundry basket moved outside the bathroom earlier that week. They hadn't just decided today. They had been preparing. Quietly, patiently. Not talking to me, arranging around me like you move furniture before guests arrive. The anger didn't explode. It grew roots. Because what hurt wasn't leaving it, was the pretending. The dinners where we talked normally. The nights they asked about work. The small smiles. All while already planning my exit. I went downstairs again and asked directly, "When did you decide this?" My dad rubbed his forehead. "Recently." A lie always sounds shorter than truth. My mom avoided eye contact and wiped an already clean counter. Silence answered louder than words. They weren't uncomfortable about me leaving. They were uncomfortable about being asked to admit it. I realized they expected gratitude. Not for the notice, but for the warning. Like I should thank them for not throwing my things outside instead. That realization flipped something inside me. I wasn't being included in a decision about my life. I was being informed of a completed plan. "Why not talk to me first?" I asked. My dad sighed heavily, annoyed. "Because discussions turn emotional." Emotional, meaning inconvenient. Meaning I might have had a voice. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted compliance. Quiet, quick, and simple. I walked back upstairs and looked around differently. Not at my belongings, at the timing. Rent was due in 2 weeks. My next paycheck in 5 days. They picked the exact moment where I'd struggle to react fast. That wasn't random. That was strategy. My chest tightened, but not with panic anymore. With clarity. This wasn't about independence. It was about control. If I left scrambling, they stayed comfortable. If I questioned, I became the problem. The narrative was ready. I was difficult, ungrateful, dramatic. I could already hear relatives repeating it. I opened my phone and checked local tenant laws. Not because I planned to fight yet, but because something felt wrong about paper on a pillow counting as legal notice. The first search confirmed it instantly. Evictions required formal delivery, proper filing, real documentation, none of which this was. My hands stopped shaking. Not relief, something sharper. They hadn't used the legal process because legality creates record. They wanted silence instead. They weren't forcing me out officially. They were hoping I'd remove myself before questions existed. Downstairs I heard them talking again, softer this time. My name mentioned, then lowered voices. I stood halfway on the stairs and listened without meaning to. My mom. "It's better this way." My dad. "Less confrontation. Not kinder. Not safer. Easier." The anger finally solidified. They didn't want to hurt me, they wanted to avoid discomfort. My entire housing security traded for their convenience. I stepped back before they saw me. Because suddenly I understood. They expected sadness. Maybe tears. Maybe begging. They were prepared for emotion. They weren't prepared for awareness. I returned to my room and read the notice again, slower. Every word impersonal, copied from somewhere else. Not written with care, assembled. That's when the final details stood out. The formatting error at the bottom. A template downloaded online. They hadn't even consulted anyone. They guessed I wouldn't check. My anger sharpened into something almost calm. Not rage, decision. If they'd spoken honestly, I might have left peacefully. But deception changes the rules. Quiet eviction becomes quiet accusation. And accusations deserve answers. I opened my camera and took a photo of the paper on the bed. Then another of the missing key hook downstairs. Then the lease document I still had saved. Evidence. The word surprised me. I wasn't thinking like a daughter anymore. I was thinking like someone being pushed out unfairly. And that realization hurt but also steadied me. Because facts don't panic. Facts wait. For the first time since reading the notice, my breathing slowed. I didn't feel powerless. I felt included in the outcome. They knocked on my door later, softer now. "Have you thought about it?" my mom asked carefully. Not if I was okay. Not if I needed help. Just whether I'd accepted. I answered calmly, "I'm considering my options." The pause outside the door stretched longer than expected. They thought I'd already be packing. I could hear uncertainty enter their silence. Not fear, but disruption. The plan depended on me reacting predictably. And I hadn't. For the first time, the situation belonged partly to me again. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the notice beside me. Earlier it looked like an ending. Now it looked like evidence of intent. They tried to make it small, a quiet transition, a gentle push. But quiet actions leave clear traces. And the anger I felt wasn't loud or wild. It was steady enough to think. Because they didn't just ask me to leave. They tried to make it unquestionable. And the moment something becomes unquestionable is exactly when you start asking questions. That night, the house felt unfamiliar, even though nothing had physically changed. The hallway light still flickered, the refrigerator still hummed, and the same floorboard creaked near my door. But every sound carried a weight it never had before. I realized how quickly comfort disappears once belonging is questioned. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, listening to my parents moving around downstairs like everything was ordinary. Their normal routine hurt more than any argument would have, because it confirmed the decision cost them nothing. I opened my closet just to do something with my hands. Shirts hung in a row, jackets still warm from recent mornings. Shoes lined near the wall. Each object suddenly looked temporary, like props waiting to be removed after a scene ends. I picked up a sweater my mom once bought me years ago and pressed it to my face out of habit. It smelled faintly like detergent and old memories. That's when sadness slipped past anger. Not dramatic, just quiet understanding that memories don't guarantee permanence. I remembered small moments differently now. Movie nights where they chose films I didn't care about. Vacations discussed at dinner without asking my schedule. Decisions explained instead of shared. None of those moments alone meant anything. Together they painted a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. I wasn't suddenly being removed. I had slowly stopped being included long before the notice appeared. The realization hurt deeper than the eviction itself. Because losing a place is temporary. Realizing you already lost your place in people is not. Around midnight, I heard laughter downstairs. Soft, casual, unbothered. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not jealousy distance. The sound confirmed they weren't lying awake questioning the choice. They weren't replaying conversations or wondering if I was okay. The situation lived entirely in my mind, not theirs. I realized they would sleep peacefully while I counted days. That imbalance hurt in a way I couldn't explain. Relationships feel mutual until a moment proves they never required equal investment from both sides. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, intending to search apartments, but instead I stared at the blank screen. Every option felt theoretical because the problem wasn't just housing, it was sudden displacement from familiarity. I thought about mornings making coffee, hearing footsteps in the hall, existing without planning each move. In 7 days, all of that would vanish. The grief wasn't for the building, it was for the routine I never appreciated until it had an expiration date attached. My phone buzzed with a friend asking about weekend plans. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed again. Explaining felt heavier than silence. I realized I didn't want sympathy yet. Saying it out loud would make it irreversible. As long as it stayed inside the house, part of me could pretend it might still change. So I replied casually and locked my phone. The loneliness wasn't physical, people existed, but emotional, like standing behind glass while life continued elsewhere. I looked again at the notice on my desk. Earlier it provoked anger. Now it felt strangely impersonal. Just ink. Just paper. Yet it carried authority because of who placed it. That contrast made my chest ache. If anyone else had handed it to me, I'd dismiss it instantly. But coming from family, it carried emotional weight law couldn't match. The sadness came from understanding trust gave the paper power, not legality. Near 2 in the morning, I walked quietly to the kitchen for water. The house was dark. I stood there remembering late nights talking years ago, casual conversations that felt secure. I tried to recall when that comfort faded but couldn't pinpoint it. Sometimes relationships don't break, they thin slowly until transparency replaces connection. I drank slowly, letting the quiet settle. The place still held echoes of belonging even while preparing to release me. Back in my room, I sat on the floor beside the bed. Packing would make it real, so I didn't start yet. I simply looked around, memorizing details, the scratch on the dresser, the faint mark on the wall where a poster used to hang, small anchors to a life about to shift. Sadness wasn't overwhelming. It was steady, patient, letting acceptance form gradually instead of forcing it. As morning approached, I understood something clearly. The pain wasn't about being asked to leave. It was about learning how replaceable my presence had become without discussion. The house hadn't changed overnight, my understanding had. And once understanding changes, nothing looks the same again. I turned off the light and lay down, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily, but also knowing the hardest part wasn't the move. It was accepting the move meant more than relocation. For 2 nights straight, the file just sat on my laptop desktop, 27 minutes long. Proof collected over weeks without them realizing. Screenshots, timestamps, recordings, and the late-night audio where they forgot I was still on the call. I kept opening it, hovering over the upload button, then closing the window again. Once something goes public, you can't pull it back. I knew pressing that button would end whatever fragile version of family peace still existed. But then I looked at the printed notice they slid under my door. No signature. No official stamp. No court seal. Just pressure disguised as legality. They never planned to fight me legally. They planned to scare me quietly. So Sunday evening, 8:03 p.m., I pressed upload. At first, the silence felt heavier than the conflict ever did. 3 views appeared, probably me refreshing the page. Then 9. Then 15. I almost convinced myself I had made a mistake. Maybe no one would care. Maybe people would think I was exaggerating. For nearly 40 minutes, the video crawled forward like it didn't want attention. Then the first real comment appeared. Why is the notice formatted like that? That isn't a valid eviction document. Another user replied underneath explaining the legal requirements missing from the page. Within minutes, people began pausing the video, screenshotting frames, analyzing dates. They weren't reacting emotionally, they were examining evidence. The views jumped to 1,000 before I even noticed. And then someone shared it. The notifications changed from occasional to constant. Every refresh doubled the number. 10,000, 25,000, 50,000. The story stopped being mine alone. Strangers connected timelines I hadn't even realized mattered. One viewer enhanced the audio and isolated the sentence where my uncle said they needed me gone before paperwork finalized. Another found public records showing the property transfer application filed days before the property transfer application filed days. The sentence where my uncle said they needed me gone. Notice appeared. I hadn't asked anyone to investigate. They just did. That's when my phone rang. My aunt. Her voice was soft, carefully calm, like she was speaking near other people. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked why I would post private family misunderstandings online. I asked one question back. If it's a misunderstanding, why does the evidence match? Silence. Then she told me I should remove it before things got worse. She never explained worse for who. Minutes later, my cousin sent long messages about reputation and respect. He said people were messaging him screenshots and asking questions he couldn't answer. He insisted we could solve it internally if I deleted the video immediately. I noticed he never said the video was false. Then my father called. For weeks he had spoken to me through others, never directly. Now his tone carried urgency disguised as authority. He said the situation was escalating unnecessarily. He said outsiders shouldn't be involved. He said families protect each other, not humiliate each other publicly. I asked if he had watched the entire video. He paused. Then he offered money. Not help. Not explanation. Payment. Delete the video and we'll handle everything, he said. In that moment, the last doubt disappeared. People who are falsely accused argue facts. People who are exposed negotiate silence. By midnight, the video crossed 100,000 views. Messages flooded in from legal professionals explaining exactly which regulations the notice violated. A housing advisor wrote a detailed breakdown of why the pressure tactics themselves could be challenged. I hadn't planned a case, but evidence had built one. Morning arrived with dozens of missed calls. And one email. A scanned statement signed by the same relatives who told me I had no right to stay. It declared I was a legal occupant and no eviction process existed against me. They requested the public misunderstanding be considered resolved. No confrontation. No meeting. Just reversal. The same people who demanded I leave immediately now documented that I could remain indefinitely, not because they reconsidered, because they were being watched. That realization felt heavier than the conflict itself. I spent years believing I lacked power in that house. But the moment truth reached outside those walls, the balance changed instantly. I didn't celebrate. I sat quietly staring at the screen, realizing something uncomfortable. They were never confident in being right. They were confident I would stay silent. The video kept spreading. Not out of drama, but because viewers recognized a pattern many had experienced themselves: pressure presented as authority, fear presented as obligation, and silence presented as respect. Comments shifted from analyzing my situation to sharing their own stories. The conversation became larger than one property dispute. That's when I decided what to do next. I didn't delete the video. I pinned it. Not for revenge. For record. Because the moment it disappears, the narrative changes. People forget evidence faster than they forget accusations. Leaving it visible meant the truth couldn't quietly fade back into private memory. My phone stopped ringing by the second evening. Messages slowed. The urgency on their side vanished once they realized the decision was final. No more threats arrived. No more pressure. Just distance. And strangely, peace. Not reconciliation, clarity. I finally understood the difference between family and control. One supports even when inconvenient. The other depends on you staying quiet to function. Pressing upload didn't destroy my family. It revealed what was already broken. Sometimes closure doesn't come from apologies. Sometimes it comes from exposure. And sometimes justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins the moment fear stops working.